Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with another build guide, and this time it's for a dual Incinerate Totem Cheiftan. And this is a build that I came up with the help of my friend Mev. He actually originally thought of the build, and then I made a couple changes and optimizations for hardcore, and here we are now. And before we get into the build, I do just want to say that this is a very cost-effective build, and it's a great league starter build. You can clear a lot of content in the game for very cheap. I haven't really tried it on Shaper or the Guardians, but I don't really see any reason why it wouldn't be able to handle those bosses. It handles everything else rather well, like Comb, Duresso, Malachi, etc. So I just never happened to push this character there because that was not the intention when I created the character. But yeah, it's just very cheap to start, and starting with the build pretty much just requires a rain of splinters, which is hard to get the first day, but you don't really need that because you can always do another type of totem. So you can do a shockwave totem or a flame totem, and then simply transition the build back into incinerate totem once you get your rain of splinters that you need to give you your extra 2 projectiles. So there's not really much of a problem there at all. And with that being said, let's get into the actual core of the build. So the build uses a couple uniques. The first one is Infernal Mantle, which is godly because of the +1 to fire gems. Gives you a ton of damage on your Incinerate, then 35% increased fire damage. And then a good chunk of ES, which is used in our Mind Over Matter Eldritch battery setup, which I'll get into later. And then it gives you the Fire to Chaos conversion, which is nerfed, but it's still pretty good. Now, you don't have to use an Infernal Mantle at all, and it's kind of hard to get a hold of a 6-link one early in the league, but a 5-link works just fine. But if you don't want to use an Infernal Mantle for whatever reason, you can always just use another chest to get your life roll and more resistances, although it's very easy to get resistances in other places. So that's why I'm not really too concerned about that. And you have a bunch of life already, so I'm not really worried about losing the life roll. And obviously the effect is just completely nullified, or the downside rather, of the spell damage taken because you're using blood magic, so you're never on low mana. So you can never proc the 100% increased spell damage taken, so you pretty much never have to worry about that at all. So yeah, I definitely recommend the chest. If you can't get it, don't need it, but certainly a big damage boost. Now, as for other uniques, the Essence Worm here is the next one, and what this basically does is it allows us to reserve our anger for no mana, or in our case it would be for health because we took blood magic so we don't have any mana and it would come off of our health. And since we're not using any other auras, we're not running into the downside of the 40% increased mana reserved on other auras. And we're getting a +2 anger. So overall, it's pretty insane. The DPS on this build is like, we can see like it's 37k here. When you have your Orb of Storms up with your Elemental Overload, procced, which is very easy to do. You can keep that up very consistently by just dropping the Orb of Storms. This shoots up to like 52k, and so that's about 125k or a little bit more per totem, and that's not even counting the Fire Pen or any of the bonus damage from your Ascendancy or anything like that. So Anger is great. Again, though, you don't need to run it. If I take it off, you see we lose probably around 5k DPS. Not the end of the world, but personally, I think it's worth it. So I run that. And for the last unique, we run Winds of Change here. And Winds of Change is great for the projectile speed. Projectile damage is always nice, but we're mainly focused on the projectile speed here because unfortunately, even with a 20 quality Incinerate, the projectile speed on the skill isn't that great. So we're trying to buff that in pretty much any way we can, and that's why I also have some on wands as well. Now, the only real downside of the Winds of Change here is that it gives the 10% movement speed reduction. And in this particular case, my character moves pretty slow because I have only 20% movement speed on boots. But ideally, you should be aiming for something higher than that. Like I said, I kind of just threw this stuff together And I just wanted these boots because they had some solid resistance on them, and I really liked the lab enchant that I had gotten. But ideally, you would definitely want either 25 or 30 move speed boots to sort of offset this penalty a little bit more. And as for the other items, belt is just pretty standard, some resist, energy shield, and life. And then my ring, I got lucky. I got a nice cast speed on there with some life and resistances. And then I crafted the percent maximum energy shield. As for the neck, just more cast speed, some dex to fill out some requirements, and a bunch of res and some life. And then for the helm, just standard helm. As you can see, we're using the 24% increase incinerate damage per stage. I think that's by far the best enchant, unless you're really struggling on projectile speed, and then you should get the projectile speed one. This actually doesn't show up in the tooltip, by the way, for whatever reason, so the damage is actually a little bit higher than what we see here. And as for the wands are actually the best part about this build because since you're not doing crit or anything, because Incinerate can't crit, it's very easy to shop for wands. You're basically looking for cast speed and spell damage and added damage. And ideally, you'd have added fire damage, but in this case, the wand was just too good to pass up, and it happened to have lightning damage on it. And obviously, getting projectile speed here is great. We have 34% on this one and 22% on this one. So we have a hearty amount of projectile speed. And with that being said, let's get into the actual ascendancy. So for the ascendancy, we pretty much come up here, and this is like the core of the build, I would say, because it gives us damage with the fire pen, and it allows our totems to leech life to themselves, which is a very powerful defensive mechanic for them. But the main thing about this node really is the 1% of damage dealt by your totems is leeches life to you. And you're going to be doing a lot of damage with totems, so you're going to be leeching a fair amount of life. Now you don't have Vol Pact, so you're not getting like the full effect of that life leech. You can always get Vol Pact, by the way. Actually, the original version of this build did have Vol Pact. I came, I think, up the top here through the ES and through Harrier and stuff, and got this jewel right here, and then picked up Vol Pact. But what I ended up realizing is that I didn't really want to sacrifice all my life regen, because when you take Vol Pact, you lose your life regen, and I have like close to 500 life regen flat here, which is amazing when you combine it with the life leech that you're getting, because life leech, when it's not instant, is essentially applied like life regen. And the other thing is I just didn't really ever find the need for Vol Pact, because this build doesn't need to tank anything because it uses totems and you can place them very quickly, and they're very tanky because they leech to themselves, and they're immune to fire damage with this node right here, which we'll get into in a second. So yeah, you pretty much never need to be face tanking anything, so your life never needs to be regenning at that speed. You're perfectly fine just without Vol Pact. And then moving on to this, like I said, we'll go over these nodes. So this is a great node, just 16% more fire damage. You take 8% less damage. And then this node is just like the super fun gravy on top node that you get from Uberlab. And the taunt is amazing because it just compounds the not having to ever tank things, as I mentioned earlier. But the real fun part for me is the immune to fire damage, because not only is it just good in general against like certain breaches or against just certain mobs in the game like Comb, but it allows you to run Ellie Reflect with no penalty whatsoever, essentially. You could run Ellie Reflect before, but it's kind of like it's just a pain in the ass to do it, and it can be dangerous in some cases because your totems are dying because they're doing so much damage. So it's putting you in like compromising positions, and it just becomes so much easier when you have immunity to fire damage, because then you can run Elemental Reflect to your heart's content, and it just saves you from having to re-roll the mod on the map. So Uber for this build is really good because it allows you to get this node, and fortunately Uber is really easy to do with this build. It's very easy to do the trials, and it's very easy to do Izara himself. I actually don't even think he hit me once, and I killed him pretty quickly. So definitely an easy fight for this build. And that's pretty much it. Oh, I want to go over the Eldritch Battery mechanics. So yeah, we get the Eldritch Battery, which puts all our ES on our mana. And we don't have any mana though, because we have Blood Magic down here. So we just end up with the ES on our blank mana wheel. And what ends up happening here is we get Mind Over Matter, and every time we take a hit, the damage is taken from mana, but ES is considered part of a mana now, so it actually takes it from your ES. And the reason why we do this is because if we were to just take this ES and we were to put it on our health as normal, like we didn't take Eldritch Battery, then the problem we run into is that because we have Blood Magic and we're damaging ourselves for each cast, our ES is like never regenerating. So once you get into a map and your ES gets chunked out and you're trying to play quickly and you're just moving through the map spamming totems, your ES is never regenerating and you're essentially losing like 1.5k effective energy shield here. And you can actually get this number much higher. My gear is actually kind of trash. My boots are low ES and my helm is low ES. I don't have the ES enchant on my neck. So you can actually get this like easily like 2k or something if you want to invest into the build. And it would be silly to lose all that just because you're constantly doing damage to yourself. So it's very helpful to have that Mind Over Matter and Eldritch Battery setup. And this makes us just like much tankier essentially than we otherwise would be. And then that's pretty much the build. As you can see, we get a couple jewels here. This one's mostly just projectile speed, life, and resistances. We pick up the cast speed over here. It's pretty much picking up cast speed where you can with life and regen and totem damage. And that's pretty much it. There is one other thing I wanted to go over though. It's a variation to the build. So you can actually drop one of the wands and use Tukahama Shield. And what Tukahama Shield does is it gives you an extra totem. So that's very good for single target because even though you're losing all the cast speed and the added damage and the spell damage, you're gaining an entire extra totem. So your DPS is definitely going to increase single target, and it also gives you 40% increased damage, so that's not terrible. But one of the main advantages of using the Tukahama shield could be is if you use the shield and then you actually replace your wand with a scepter, you can use shield charge with this build, which is a much better movement situation than we currently have, because right now this build is just fairly slow, especially because I don't have the good move speed on the boots. So if you do want to speed up the pace of this build in terms of how it clears maps and stuff, that's definitely a viable option. It can just be a little bit tough to get a well-rolled scepter, so it's something you have to be looking out for. And you're losing the projectile speed from both your wands because scepters can't get projectile speed. So just something to keep in mind, but that's a variation you can do to make it a little bit faster. And with that being said, I think that's pretty much everything. Curse reuses flammability, and then we obviously, I kind of stripped this character a bit, but we'd have a Vol Lightning Trap in here, and then we'd have Immortal Call with duration and cast when damage taken in this slot. And then we have our Orb of Storm set up right here to generate or to proc the Elemental Overload, which I think I already mentioned. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns, feel free to leave them down below and I will answer them to the best of my abilities. And thank you very much for watching and see you later.